For many centuries, Britain was a dangerous place.
It was a magnet for the very worst kind of people. Jack the Ripper dominated the headlines, but he wasn't the only killer around. Murder was afoot. The fear of death was everywhere.
But police had their work cut out to track the culprits down. In this series, we'll be investigating some of the country's most notorious and intriguing crimes.
Female defendant.
Sexual intrigue, vicious murder, as well as the latest technology, fed the nation's insatiable desire
For gruesome stories of Britain's dark side. In the parts of Scotland that were his hunting ground, the name of Peter Manuel can still elicit a shudder. He was, as Manuel described himself, the foulest beast on earth. Scotland's largest city was once one of Europe's major ports. During the Victorian era, its population exploded due to its booming industries and abundance of jobs. The two world wars impacted greatly on this once magnificent metropolis, and by the 1950s it was a city down on its luck. High unemployment, soaring crime, deprivation and poverty would all take their toll on its inhabitants.
Everything about it was black, so it was like the ultimate noir city. People were living in appalling housing, all on top of one another. There were no bathrooms, houses were being chucked up. You could actually kick your way through walls because the building standard was so low.
Glasgow at that time was starting to undergo a period of change in relation to housing, slum clearance, tower blocks beginning to be built. There'd still be some of the local communities in and around Glasgow retain their own sense of identity. And it was in one of those that Peter Manuel lived with his parents.
Peter Manuel met a girl named Anna O'Hara. They were set to get married in the summer of 1955. Everything seemed to be going well for the happy couple, but all was not what it seemed.
She was what's known as a clippy. She was a bus conductor. She and her mother were treated to the charming side of Peter's psychopathy. And he was very attentive, he was a complete gentleman.
They were just about to get engaged, and she started to receive anonymous letters about Peter Manuel saying, "You don't know who you're engaged to. You don't know this man, he has a terrible dark past."
She wanted him to go to confession to make sure that he was on the road to respectability. And when he wouldn't do so, she refused to go through with the marriage.
The engagement was called off, and it turns out that the letters were from Peter Manuel. And he said later about it that he didn't know why he had done that. And I think there was a spark of decency in Peter Manuel. He spent all his time amongst criminal types. You know, there's lots of stories about him carousing around Glasgow with wild people. But he said later he really liked that girl, and he maybe knew deep down that things were going to go really badly wrong and didn't want to implicate her in it.
The same day that he was supposed to have got married, he takes his revenge.
Late that evening, 29-year-old Mary McLachlan was making her way home from a dance. She had almost made it when Peter Manuel rushed out from the darkness and grabbed her. He had a knife and forced her over a barbed wire fence into a field. At knife point, he sexually assaulted her, but instead of killing her, he eventually let her go. Mary's screams for help were heard, however. The police were called, but despite searchers coming within yards of them, Manuel and Mary were undiscovered. He didn't kill Mary, however. Her terror had been enough to satisfy him. Eventually, he let her go. Her ordeal had lasted hours, and it was far from over. Mary went to the police, and Manuel was arrested. The charge of rape was brought against him. A date for the trial was set, and without formal training or actual knowledge of the legal system, Manuel decided to defend himself.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the fine words from my esteemed colleague from the prosecution. You've heard from my accuser, and you've heard from the police. Now, it's time for you to hear the truth. Mary and I have been pals for a long time. More than pals, in fact. And it was earlier on the 30th that we met. We were taking my dog for a walk. We had a wee lover's tiff. We scuffled, and she cut her lip. Now, I'm no proud of myself. And I said sorry, right away. And I say it again, to you, today. Mary, I am sorry. We made up. And I said, let's go and take a look at those snares, for rabbits. So we go to the field. Now, to get in, you have to clamber over some barbed wire. And she got another wee cut. She was really in the wars that night. Anyway, there were no rabbits. So, we sat down, had a smoke. And then, we see this train coming. And suddenly Rusty, that's my dog, he goes chasing after it, like it's a wee cat. I had to do something. So I took out my knife, and I'm no denying I had it. And I lobbed it in the other direction to try and distract him. That knife saved my dog. Now, I'm no blaming Mary for this. You tell a tale, and before you know it, the fibs, they get bigger and bigger, and you can't stop. But I'm telling you, I did not do this.
I think he chose to represent himself because he was arrogant. He's callous, he's cruel, he likes to intimidate.
It was obviously something he'd fantasised about and thought about in the way that some of us might fantasise about being on a chat show. He fantasised about being a lawyer in court and doing a better job.
Manuel believed he was better than the system and was certainly capable of taking on the system.
The wee man against the world sort of thing. And the jury warmed to it.
To the truth, for it shall set you free. You get your brains from your father.
Aye, get my looks from my ma, though.
I didn't know how you managed up there. I'd be too frightened.
I told the truth, ma.
You showed that girl what was what.
Gives another blast of that, would you, Dad?
go on then.
If ever I see that girl round here, I'll be giving her a piece of my mind. You can't slander the Manuels and get away with it. Cheers!
Cheers. In his eyes, Manuel had proved his genius in court. He was not like other men. The rules did not apply to him. Nobody could stop him now. Manuel was born in New York in 1927, but his father's attempt at the American dream was unsuccessful. The family moved back across the Atlantic when Manuel was just a child. They settled permanently near Glasgow in 1945. By then, the teenage Peter Manuel had found alternative accommodation of his own. At the age of 16, he'd been sent to Borstal, a corrective school for young delinquents. Manuel had turned to crime early. As the years went by, he graduated to more and more serious offences. In 1946, he was arrested on 15 charges of housebreaking. While on bail paid for by his father, Manuel then sexually assaulted 3 women in less than a week. Caught and convicted of rape, he was sentenced to 9 years in jail. Manuel had grown into a man with a fierce temper and a fiercer sense of his own superiority. He was a fantasist, boasting to fellow prisoners that he was a champion boxer, that his father was a mobster.
He had a lot of time to fantasise because he spent so much time sitting in cells.
Manuel had gone to the American consul in Glasgow. He said he had something of grave importance to American national security. To his amazement, perhaps, they believed him. He was flown to Ruislip. The FBI interviewed him and said, the man's a fantasist.
He told stories like he was on a plane and the plane couldn't land and he managed to land the plane even though he'd never been in a plane or flown I mean, they were not very good stories.
Manuel may have been living in a world of fantasy, but his actions most definitely had lasting consequences in real life. One afternoon in early 1956, a man was out walking his dogs across East Kilbride Golf Course when he spotted something. It was a girl lying on the ground near the 5th tee. At first, he thought she was sunbathing, but he soon discovered the truth. The body was identified as 17-year-old Anne Nealons. She'd been missing for 2 days. The killer, police determined, had spent some time with the body after death, rearranging it, glorying in what he'd done.
Annie Nealons was a nice, ordinary girl, just embarking upon her life. And she happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
What we can trace from the forensics was she ran for a mile to get away from this person. She lost shoes. I mean, it must have been a frantic run.
Part of his makeup is suggested that he likes inflicting the terror. This gives him a sexual high.
Eventually he catches her and he bludgeons her with a big bit of metal.
The investigation soon focused on Peter Manuel. At the time of the murder, he was working with the gas board on a site next to the golf course. When police came asking for information, he made sure they remembered him, as if he was trying to cultivate suspicion. 10 days after the body was found, police interviewed Manuel at his work, and at the same time, other officers called in on the family home.
Thank you, Mrs. Manuel.
So, what's all this about then?
We're establishing the whereabouts of your son, Peter, on the night of the 2nd of January.
Well, he was here.
The whole night?
Aye.
Is that your recollection as well, Mrs. Manuel?
You didn't think he had anything to do with that girl?
We're exploring all lines of inquiry.
He was in that night, though, wasn't he? She wakes every time the door goes.
I am a light sleeper.
And that morning after, you said how well you'd kept.
That's right.
It's fortunate you have such a keen memory, Mr. Manuel.
Aye, it is.
Anne Nealon's parents drove past the golf course that night. They'll live knowing their daughter was dead or dying right there as they drove. I know you have a daughter.
Don't you bring Teresa into this.
I have a daughter myself, Mr. Manuel. We have to find the man who did this.
Not my Peter. He's a good boy.
Now you've heard her. Peter was here all night. There's your whereabouts for you.
My colleagues will be in touch should we have any further questions.
I'll see you out.
Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Manuel.
Naturally, they had some loyalty towards the son that they would have loved, despite his criminal conduct.
Like a lot of people who commit appalling crimes, the last bastion of decency is you're loyal to your family. And it's really over-amplified.
Manuel had long been obsessed with gangsters. He yearned for acceptance from the bigwigs of Glasgow's underworld.
He knew the life stories of Dillinger and Capone and Babyface Nelson and people like that. And I think that gave him comfort because he was able to say, there are people in this world that I can identify with.
He spent time with and sought out the company of people who would have in their day been recognised as significant criminal players. Very quickly, they came to realise that they couldn't trust Manuel.
Being a mobster is about being part of a collective, and he was never ever part of a collective.
He was flamboyant. He attracted attention. And the last thing any professional criminal wants is somebody who does grandstanding performances and draws attention to himself.
In March 1956, he teamed up with another low-level criminal. Their plan was to rob the canteen of a nearby coal mine, but police were tipped off. Both men were arrested and bailed. A trial date was set for that October. In the next 6 months of freedom, Manuel would be busy. Over the summer, he committed a string of minor thefts and break-ins, but as his likely incarceration drew closer, Manuel became bolder.
Peter's still out.
Aye.
It's getting on.
Aye.
Did he say he'd be so late? think I'll make up his bed for him.
Bridget.
My luck, he'll walk in the moment I'm finished.
Will you let me read my paper in peace? If he gets back late, he can make his own bed. He's a grown man.
On the morning of September the 9th, 1956, Peter Manuel broke into the Watt home. He shot Marion in the head. Her sister was visiting and asleep beside her. Manuel shot her twice. Then he went to the room of 16-year-old Vivian. She had been woken by the gunshots and put up a fight. Manuel beat her unconscious, tied her up, and shot her. He then left, taking nothing. Manuel was initially a suspect, but the investigation veered off track. The grieving William Watt was accused instead. He had told police he was 90 miles distant when the killings occurred, but 2 witnesses insisted they'd seen him elsewhere that morning. By now, Manuel had been convicted and jailed for the break-in at the coal mine. But for his more serious crimes, an innocent man now faced the gallows. Manuel never liked others getting attention for his work. From his prison cell, he saw William Watt accused of the murders he had committed. He reached out to Watt's solicitor. He had information, he said. Could they meet? The risk of incriminating himself was nothing next to the thrill of reliving his crimes. But Manuel's arrogance and need for attention helped save William Watt. The solicitor badgered police to look at Manuel again, for despite their best efforts, investigators had found little to pin the murders on Watt. No weapon and no motive.
When they investigated it fully, they realised it was impossible for him to have done that. His car hadn't left the car park. It was covered in frost.
The sister-in-law's children still believe that William Watt had something to do with it. Other people think it's an outrage to even suggest that.
William Watt definitely didn't commit these murders. Some people to this day say he helped organise the whole thing, but I don't think there's any mileage in that at all.
I'm always inclined to believe that it was more complicated than a nut job went crazy.
Peter Manuel would have to wait nearly another year. He emerged from Barlinnie Prison on the 30th of November, 1957.
There's trifle left if you're still hungry.
I'm sorry I didn't come to me in that mass, Ma. Happy Christmas.
You didn't have to do that.
What kind of son do you think I am?
You'll come next year, won't you, to Mass?
I promise.
A scarf. Oh, it's beautiful. Thank you. You are a good boy. You are.
His parents hoped he was a reformed man, still young enough to turn his life around. Those generous presents, however, were all things he'd stolen. And just 3 days after Christmas, Manuel killed again. 17-year-old Isabel Cook left her home at 6:45 p.m. on the 28th of December 1957. Within minutes, she was dead. Peter Manuel had returned to the scene of one of his earliest crimes. In March 1946, he'd attacked a young mother out walking with her child. Now, in the darkness of the same footpath, he killed Isabel.
This is what arouses him. The stalk, the chase, the rape, the kill. It's all part of that violent behaviour.
He didn't like to stray too far from home. He liked to be in areas that he was familiar with, comfortable with. Whether that was because he felt he could go there and leave with a better chance of avoiding sight or avoiding capture, that would be guesswork. But all along, Manuel repeated what he did.
I think he chose the same location. It's a sort of almost like a shout of triumph. I did it once here before, I can do it here again.
To the agony of her parents, her body would not be found for almost 3 weeks. In the meantime, her killer would strike again. Less than a mile away from where Manuel had killed Isabel Cook, the Smart family were celebrating. After sending their 10-year-old son to bed, Peter and Doris Smart had seen in the new year with the customary whiskey. At around 2:30 a.m., neighbours saw them switch off the lights. During the week, they had lain undiscovered. Manuel had returned repeatedly to the house. He had eaten their food, slept on their couch, and fed their pet cat. Stealing the family's car, he even felt confident enough to stop and give a policeman a lift. How clever Manuel must have felt. How invincible. This time, however, he had made a mistake. On the day before he was murdered, Peter Smart went to the bank. He had received his monthly wages and withdrew £35 in crisp new notes. Smart folded them into his wallet and went home to begin the New Year celebrations.
Mr. Smart had cash in his pocket, and Peter Manuel took the cash and went off and got drunk.
He was singing songs, he was paying people into dances, he was getting taxis. He was on a real high.
He's showing off to everybody in the pub, and he's saying, look at these sequentially numbered notes. He's a criminal mastermind.
He just thought he was clever enough to get away with it all.
When the Smart family were eventually discovered, the police automatically suspected Manuel. They had also learned that Manuel had suddenly come into money on New Year's Day. Investigators tracked the notes he used. Their serial numbers matched those belonging to Peter Smart. At last, police had evidence linking Manuel to the crime. Police had proof that linked Manuel to the multiple murders of the Smart family, but they needed more. Many hours were spent following leads and looking for further, more incriminating evidence.
I don't think there's any doubt that in the police inquiry, although they were pretty sure by this time, the one thing the police could not afford was for Manuel to walk. That would have been fairly catastrophic.
The police go to the house and search the house, and they find a pair of gloves that have been stolen, and they say to Mr. Manuel, "Are these your gloves?" And he basically muddies the answer.
At that point, they had a case against Samuel on the basis of recent possession in criminative circumstances, raises a presumption in law that he was responsible for stealing them in the first place or breaking in. Now, it's a ludicrous notion that Samuel Manuel went to break into the house, but at the end of the day, he didn't tell the truth.
Police, of course, would later deny Samuel's arrest was in any way intended to put pressure on his son, but it's difficult to see any other rationale behind it. And it worked. Manuel agreed to talk, on one condition. Police had made a deal with Peter. If he were to confess to the murders, his father would be set free.
How are you?
James and Teresa send their love.
Oh, aye. Send them mine. You all right there?
I'm fine.
Has he been released?
Not yet.
May will be.
Depends on you, Peter.
He better not lose his job over this carry on. My dad's one of the finest men at the gasworks.
Didn't say a word, son. I'll be fine.
You wanted to speak to your mother?
You shouldn't have come to a place like this, Smart.
Hey, he'll no be telling yous a thing.
Samuel.
Coercion, that's what this is. I'll be talking to my solicitors.
Let the boy speak. I know 'tisn't easy for you telling us things. Maybe we've not always wanted to listen. But I'm here now.
I've done some terrible things. I killed that girl in East Kilbride. And Isabel Cake. I shot the women in the house. All three of them. The wards. That was me. And the family with a wee boy on New Year. I don't even know how these things happened. to do it.
Manuel's confession would seem to be exactly what the police needed to secure his conviction. After having time to contemplate his position, Manuel decided he would try and utilize the police tactics against them at the trial, alleging it was unlawful pressure that lay behind his confession. It was a high-stakes gamble. Lose, and he would hang. And Manuel wasn't done gambling yet. His trial began in Glasgow that May, but with the eyes of the nation on that court, Manuel couldn't resist seizing the focus. He sacked his lawyers. Once again, he would conduct his own defense.
Half the audience who have waited all night to get into court, half of them leave because they can't listen to it anymore, and he's there for 6 hours.
But he liked to talk, he liked the sound of his own voice, he believed he was in control of what was happening. Any lawyer who appears in court on a regular basis, as a profession, will say, asking questions is easy. The secret is to know which question to ask, and even more so, knowing when to sit and say nothing.
Manuel had the arrogance to think he could defend himself, and this was only bolstered by his 2 star witnesses, the people who had always given him an alibi, his parents.
His father was bullish and lied and gave him an alibi and basically just talked nonsense indignantly, which is the worst way to lie.
He said that it looked as if he'd been drugged or he'd been drinking. He didn't hear his son say anything in terms of confessions, not a thing. The police made all this up.
The 2 of them think it's gone really well and they're both chortling and everyone in the court hates them. So he doesn't really have any idea how he's coming over.
I swear by Almighty God that I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Could you confirm your name for the court?
I'm Mrs. Bridget Manuel,
And your age?
54.
And you live at number 32 4th Street, Uddingston?
That's right,
And I also believe you are my mother.
I am.
Then I'll turn it once, if I may, to the 16th of January this year. You were taken along with my father, your husband, to Hamilton Police Station, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you know why?
We were told you wanted to read out a statement.
And what did that statement concern?
A few crimes and a few mysteries about things that happened in Lanarkshire.
Did that statement mention any specific crimes?
No.
And did you hear me make any other statement to you?
You asked if we were all right.
And that was all.
You said you didn't know how these things happened or what made you do them.
What makes you think I said that?
I heard you.
Could it not have been one of the police you heard?
I thought I heard you.
But it could have been. Was it not one of the police you heard?
I thought it was you.
That's what I'm trying to get at. Is it a fact that you think you heard me say it, or that I did say it?
I don't know.
Did you definitively and plainly hear me say, I don't know what makes me do these things?
I heard you say it, Peter.
No one else hears him saying that. The father never ever gives evidence that he said that. The cops don't say that he said that. So is Mrs. Manuel making it up under oath because she feels that she has to protect people from her son? It's a really fascinating conflict.
I've never seen anything to suggest that she was other than at heart a decent woman, and must have been terribly torn by this desire to do something to help her son, and the realisation that he actually was beyond any kind of help that she could give.
She'd taken an oath on the Bible. Her loyalty really was to decency and telling the truth.
Simply as a human being, you might think your children had strayed, you might think they had done things that were wrong, but if your son or daughter sat in front of you and confessed to that kind of a crime, how would you react?
The jury were unconvinced by his claims about police coercion. The judge strategically instructed the jury to find Manuel not guilty of the murder of Neelands due to lack of evidence, although he was almost certainly responsible for it. The jury found him guilty of killing the Watt family, guilty of killing Isabel Cook, and guilty of killing the Smarts. Peter Manuel would hang. On the 11th of July, 1958, 31 years and 4 months after they'd seen him into the world, Manuel's parents were informed of his execution. He'd been a liar, a thief, a serial killer, and their son.